Morant with a running start. Oh, it dunks! Oh, my goodness! Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone! Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it! A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance. Adams going long. Morant! He hit it! John Morant, insanity!
You gotta be kidding me. Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. On today's episode, I'm joined by Brian Schroeder, a NBA draft expert and a annual guest. Brian, how's it going, man?
It's going. Weather's nice. Draft is closer than every day. It's closer.
That's right.
Done with this draft.
It keeps creeping closer until finally it's in the rear view. Brian, the Grizzlies are maybe you could argue, as Grizzlies fans, we've been arguing, like we got in a good spot for team building. Yes, we had a horrible season, but if you look at some of the teams that have won the title recently or made the finals, like the Mavericks, they've taken gap years. We've had a lot of teams maybe miss the playoffs and then bounce back. So I think Grizzlies fans, we can build this narrative. All right. We didn't have to play into May or even June. We were done early April. And also, we get the benefit of a top 10 pick in the upcoming NBA draft. Of course, this upcoming NBA draft, like you sort of alluded to, and many people have said, not really the NBA draft you want a top 10 pick in. But maybe you can give us some names and some ideas. Yes, Brian. Comment on the state of this year's draft.
That being said, this is not a good draft. It's certainly a below average one. But I do think people act like, we're never going to have a draft as bad as 2000 ever again, just because there's just too much talent in the world.
Yeah.
And teams are they're good at it now. Like they're good at the entire process. This is a bad draft if you are, let's say, at 3 to 5, 3 to 6, and you're trying to do the traditional, like the Brandon Miller types. Like I'm not even huge on Brandon Miller, but that's a guy who will be a starter and like a second or third star, probably get a max contract. Bad draft for that kind of guy. Like that kind of guy may not be there if you're not in the top 2 or 3. But if you're just like, hey, can somebody play 20 minutes and play a role? Yeah, there's plenty of guys who can do that. And I think that's more or less what the Grizzlies are looking for. They're not looking for, assuming they can not be the most injured team in the history of basketball next year.
Yeah.
I think they've got their main 3 guys, and then they've got like Smart, and they've got like Vince, GG, guys like the interesting you can play later. They just need a couple more guys to fit roles at this point. I think they can feel pretty confident about being a 45-win team or above.
So what are my odds? Okay, so you're pepping me up. You say we don't need, like a great starter level player. I would push back and say that's exactly what we need. Yeah, that's exactly what we need, Brian.
You're not going to get that in this draft.
Okay, so we're not going to get the Grizzlies' 4th best player on a title team. We're not going to get a player who in 2 to 3 years can be better than current day Marcus Smart.
If you're looking for that player as a scorer, no, you're probably not getting that guy. Like if you're looking for 16 to 20 points per game.
Yeah.
You're not at 9. Maybe Reese is that. Maybe Topic is that. Maybe Rob Dillingham is that. But those guys aren't probably going to be around at 9. And Dillingham would be interesting. I don't generally believe in drafting for fit in the lottery, but Dillingham would be an odd fit with another small, thin guard. That's kind of an interesting. I don't know if that really works, but the obvious guy that I keep seeing Grizzlies fans talk about is Clingan, because they just they basically just want Steven Adams again, and like he'd be fine for that. Like his biggest issue to me is that he just doesn't seem like a guy who's going to be playing 35 minutes a game, but 25 to 30, like the idea. You'll see the Walker Kessler thing so much with him. This is Donovan Clingan, the UConn center.
Right.
You'll see the Walker Kessler comparison with him. Walker Kessler is so much better an athlete. Also, Walker Kessler weighs 240, 250. Clingan weighs 285. Like, big difference. But I've always thought that Zubac was kind of the guy you're getting if you really believe in Clingan, of like, this starting center. Like,
yeah.
He will block shots. He will rebound. He will finish. He's not like, I wouldn't say he's like an elite scorer in the paint, but he's 7'2" with a 7'7" wingspan and huge and has okay touch. Like, he will hit hook shots if you give him hook shots. He'll dunk open on open passes, that kind of stuff.
Are you suggesting I should offer the 9th pick for Ivica Zubac? You
might be able to get him.
I actually reached out to a Clippers writer and asked them if Zubac would be available, and they were like, I don't think so, but who knows? Zubac, I think, is in the last year of his deal. Before, Brian, we dive into like Clingan and some of the other prospects the Grizzlies might take with the 9th pick. I want to ask you a little bit more about some current Grizzlies players because, like, you talked about, like, in the lottery, you don't normally want to draft for fit. I do think it's a little bit weird, though, with the Grizzlies where you sort of, at least I consider fit because, like, let's be honest, if we have jamorant and Desmond Bane, and we're going to plan to have those guys for the next 5 years, and then even if you have Marcus Smart, all right, he's not long-term, but if you have jamorant, Desmond Bane, and Marcus Smart, and then this gaping, mawing hole in the front court, it's kind of like, all right. And even considering some of the exciting young guys like Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson, where it's like, I feel like you have to think about Ja, Dez, Vince, and Gigi when you look at the draft, but maybe not. But talking about some current Grizzlies players, I want to ask you about Vince Williams Jr. Mainly because when you were on this show 2 years ago, before the draft, before the 2022 draft, you identified Vince Williams Jr. as a guy that you loved in the draft and a guy you thought the Grizzlies should get. Lo and behold, they went and got him. And now last season, Vince Williams Jr. had a breakout campaign. And first question about Vince Williams Jr., what you saw last year, I mean, that to me, that seemed like best case scenario. He exceeded my wildest dreams. And I'm curious, for you, is this him hitting his ceiling, or do you think there's more to go? And just what did you take from his breakout year last year?
I feel like there's always more to go with NBA players. Like, once you're in the league, you kind of work on different things. A guy I always think of with that, like Norman Powell, was not a shooter, not really a scorer, and just kind of slowly got better at it over time. As long as you hit like a certain athletic threshold, which I think Vince hits, although he's certainly, I would say he's not a high level athlete, but he's not like a bad athlete. So I think he can probably improve on certain things, maybe get a little more comfortable. The question for him, it's going to be interesting how he fits. He should fit fine with, like, let's say he's the fifth starter, like the guy that they needed at the 3 for 6 years now.
Yeah.
I think he fits fine, but it is sort of like, what's the ultimate ceiling of a guy who's got like a 18 usage, playing with starters, or do you keep him off the bench and just have him be like your kind of creator 2-3 at the 2-3 position? But yeah, I think this is sort of what I envisioned Vince could be. It's just with all the injuries and how much more offensive. It wasn't even that he had to take offensive value. It was just more at a certain point they were like, well, we don't have anybody. Vince,
yeah,
do what you want.
He had a few games where his usage was unreal and he was like flirting with triple doubles, and none of us expected that. But like I've been kind of early on it back in December. I was like, I'm cool with Vince being our starting 3 and Marcus Smart being the 6th man guy, because Marcus is a higher usage player. I'm fine with having Vince do nothing but rebound and pass and then, hit some shots.
Shoot spot ups, yeah.
Yeah, so I went back and listened to that episode from 2 years ago, and your pre-draft analysis of Vince was just that, like, he was a stocks king in college and basically started college with no offense and then slowly developed offense. I would say based on what he did last year and then the rebounding numbers, like he's a good free throw shooter and like 3-pointers were going in, and it wasn't all in like the Grizzlies garbage time part of the season. Like some of it was, he actually played alongside Ja Morant and Ja Morant's games. And like, those games in December, they were still trying. They still had dreams of making the play-in back then. So I was incredibly encouraged by Vince, and just like the shooting was there, and it seemed like, oh, this guy might be an average 3-point shooter. When I combine that with that motor, like you mentioned, his maybe not elite athleticism, like give me okay athleticism and the 100% motor or 110% motor every day, where it's like that guy's just going to outwork. So like, what did you take of his shooting stroke? Just like, was that something that you thought was eye opening, or you thought, all right, like you said with Norm Powell, like these guys could develop?
He was hitting in his last year at VCU. I was pretty confident he was a decent shooter.
Yeah.
I think that's where the improvement would really come from. If he really just becomes like an elite spot up guy, then he's like a 15, 20 million a year guy at a certain point. Which doesn't mean as much as it used to, obviously, with cap going up. But you pay $15 million for a fifth starter now, that's fine. That is a reasonable price to pay. I think Vince, of all there are two things with this lost year that I think the Grizzlies can feel confident that they feel confident in. One is Vince, and the other is Gigi. These are guys we should have around, should play a lot. A lot of the other guys maybe not. But but then again, I don't know. Like we'll probably talk about Jake LaRavia, and I still think Jake LaRavia is a guy who fits in as a bench guy. And I think he was probably asked to do too much this year, but we'll see. I think Vince is probably the main takeaway from last season. Of like that's a rotation player. That's a guy who should be playing 25 minutes a game. I
think because of Gigi's age, most Grizzlies fans are saying, like whatever, it's semantics, or who cares if you pick like the biggest takeaway. Like Gigi's upside is huge, but I lean more like, I felt like what Vince did was maybe more sustainable. Like maybe Gigi becomes an all-star. Who knows? Like he might become Paul George, but like what Vince did was like, oh, that guy could be a fifth starter / in the rotation for, I think, anyone. He could play a PJ Washington role on like a Mavericks going to the finals, I think. And the Grizzlies locking him down for cheap. Like that's the silver lining of last season. G.G. Jackson. So he, of course, is super young, basically younger than anybody in this draft, or as young as anybody in this draft. Are you of the opinion that I've heard some people say that like if he was in this draft, he would probably be top of the draft or top of the prospects?
It's hard to say because the situation in South Carolina was much better this year, so maybe. But the situation when he was in South Carolina was so. I mean, he was like a 36 usage player. It was crazy,
right?
And he was horribly inefficient. But I think he would be a top 10 pick in this draft. I think if he'd gone back to South Carolina and had, let's say, slightly better efficiency numbers on a better team, because the talent is there. He's I'm not even sure. I think I would agree with you. I think I'm not convinced that Gigi is going to be an all-star or superstar or anything, but I think he probably will be at worst like a mismatch guy off the bench you can rely on to be like a pretty potent scorer. And I think in any draft, that's a top. You can take that guy in the top 20. That's a good outcome.
Yeah.
And I was really conflicted on him. At one point last year, I had him top 20, and then I would watch games and just see. I mean, I think you could see it with what he is now. I think he even had a few games like that where he would have some 5 of 20 games.
Right.
He had a lot of those in South Carolina, but I would feel confident in him moving forward. It's like at very least he is definitely an NBA player. So where they got him,
for the 45th pick, that's a win.
Yeah. And then he just has he does have, as sad as I am to say it, he has sort of the juice as a wing creator, like that Zaire never showed, that Roddy never showed, even in college. That they should really. It's part of why I think you said about them not looking for centers. They don't need to look for a 3 as much as I think they have in the recent years. Like you always, I mean, obviously, one of the strengths of this draft until all these guys withdrew were the kind of combo 3-4 power guys, the chucking darts kind of guys, as Chuck likes to say, his favorite guys. That we lost a lot of those guys. They didn't die, but they went back to school. We've lost them.
Yes.
But I think you still look at those guys, and the Grizzlies have famously always kind of taken those guys, the weirdo college guys. But definitely with Vince and with Gigi, I think you can feel like we might have some guys who can play the three.
Oh yeah,
better
definitely.
than we've had.
I mean,
so
it's
and
the
you can
first
always
year.
sign somebody too.
Like you said, it's the first year in forever where I'm like, oh, we're actually kind of good. It's small forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anytime someone with Gigi's athletic skills and age, regardless of the context and the outcome of the actual NBA game, if he's stringing together multiple 30-point games, you're like, oh, okay. Like that's pretty cool. I was talking about Santi Aldama because Santi Aldama is a guy that when the Grizzlies surprised people by drafting him, and then we watched him at Summer League, and he had a really bad Summer League his first year. You were telling me at Summer League, like, I like what I see. And I was like, what? And so Santi's been, it's been a little up and down where like his second year, he broke out. It seemed like he's gonna be a promising young player. Last year, he kind of plateaued and now he's going into the final year of his first contract. So like the Grizzlies have to decide if he's going to come back. What are your thoughts on Santi Aldama? Did you watch enough of him last year to get an opinion on like, all right, maybe it isn't going to totally work out for him to be like someone you can depend on in your rotation?
I think he's still the same guy. Like I think I had him 30 in that draft. And the only real question I had was like, is he athletically at all an NBA player? And I think that's at Summer League. He looked like, if nothing else, he was like, hey, he moves well, like he's big.
Yeah.
I think you can keep him around, but they definitely do have to make a decision. Like if we extend him or, like, what does he make? Like what kind of, like, do you really want to sink a lot of capital of that guy? But I think he will look better. Like he looks a lot better when he's a guy who I don't think scales very well to high usage. But like when he was next to Jaren and like Ja was around, I think he was a guy who was kind of, the rising tide raises all ships, and he's one of those ships. So yeah, I think Xavier's gone. The front court depth is not great. So I feel like
they need him.
You kind of want him to stick around, but at the same time, I guess the question is like, you extend him or you just sign like a Muscala type, like not maybe Muscala might be done,
both.
But like, like I feel like I say this about the NFL drafts all the time, and other people agree, but like free agency is where you fill needs.
Yeah.
When you're taking in the top 20, I feel like you just got to take the guy that you feel like could be the best player down the line. The exceptions are, I will say, like if the Grizzlies draft a center, like them and the Spurs getting a guard with one of those two picks, I kind of feel like it will probably happen, just because the need is so, like, at a certain point the need becomes big enough that you have to do it. Yeah, it's a bad situation to put yourself in. Not like the Grizzlies put themselves in there. Steven Adams got hurt. That's what happened.
Yeah,
it's not their fault. They didn't do it on purpose. Obviously, they'd love to still have him around. Every team would, but we'll see if he can play again. But yeah, like I feel like Santi is sort of like, if Vince and Gigi are in the column of like, yes, these guys are for real. Santi's in the wait and see. He's in the middle, and then we'll see who's on the far side. I unfortunately think Zaire might be there.
Yeah, I think Zaire's on his way out. One more player on the Grizzlies' current roster I want to talk about before we hit some draft prospects is Jake LaRavia. You mentioned him. Jake LaRavia, notably younger than Dalton Connect. He's
younger than a lot of guys in this draft.
Yeah, so LaRavia came on into the year, finally got to show some stuff, put some stuff on tape that says like, okay, he belongs in the NBA. I think we can be confident he belongs in the NBA, where before that he'd shown absolutely nothing that made you think that. The positives for me, I like the fact that he could get to the line. And I like the fact that he was a great free throw shooter. And then you had these glimpses, like a handful of games where he just knocked down every three. And every other game, his 3-point shooting numbers were horrible. So like, I'm a little not sure what to take of his 3-point shooting numbers, because he's like a lot of guys in the NBA. I feel like his utility is based on, well, how many threes did you knock down? And so I became encouraged by what I saw, but also, I have to consider the context of, we were 25 games under 500 when he got in and had played a lot of minutes. So what'd you see from LaRavia this year, and how do you see him as a prospect, maybe even stacking up against some of the guys in this year's draft?
I still think he might be I call these guys 3 out of 5 players, where like the allure is like, yeah, he's pretty good at everything, but like the drawback is what does he do at like a level that's high enough to like you have to play? Well, how does he make you put him on the floor? I don't know if there's anything he does that you're like, we have to play this guy. But at the same time, he should be on a roster because like he could fill in.
Yeah.
He's okay. He to me, I feel pretty confident that he is like a 8th, 9th, 10th man in the NBA. Like he could be on a play. Like the Celtics could probably use him right now, just like a guy to fill in, play like 10, 12 minutes a game. I think the question is like, what do you pay him? Because like Santi, I feel like could still make 8 to 10 to 12 million of like this guy's a fill-in. Like this guy, Santi's kind of a weird comparison because I think Santi does some things very, very well and other things not well at all. And like, I feel like as draft prospects, when you get into like the 30s and 40s, doesn't matter. But like LaRavia is a guy who I think even I probably overrated a little bit because he doesn't have any like huge weaknesses aside from the shot just being consistent, but he was shot better in college. So you think you convince yourself like, yeah, that guy, and you're right when you say this, that he's a fill-in guy. He can play in the NBA. But when you talk about these guys like lottery first round picks, I'm looking like it's not can he play in the NBA? It's can he do something well in the NBA? The guy and I've said this 3 or 4 times on this draft cycle, the guy I always think of for that kind of player is Carl Landry. Because Carl Landry had, 2 skills? He set screens, and he shot 16-footers.
Yeah.
He just happened to be a top 10 to 15 guy at that in the world. So he played minutes. Like you needed to play him because he was really good at 2 or 3 things.
Carl Landry is a funny example because he's the archetype of player that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Because, what do? You make 15-footers on the baseline? We don't shoot those anymore.
Ronnie Brewer is another guy I think of like that. Like Ronnie Brewer played defense and he could cut.
We traded a first-round pick for Ronnie Brewer. He played like 3 games before blowing his hamstring out. I have a Ronnie Brewer Grizzlies jersey, the greatest number 9 in franchise history.
You better. He'll come for you.
I know.
I mean, as an owner of a Tyrese Thomas Bulls jersey, I can only respect.
There you go.
But yeah, it's like, but that kind of guy, like there are still specialists now. But you mentioned Connect. I think Connect is kind of that kind of. I mean, I actually think his defense and his athleticism are fine, but he's more like in the Doug McDermott vein of like this guy's a shooter. He's going to shoot. This is why you play him. Where I don't know if Jake has that thing where like you have to play him, but at the same time, I still think he is an NBA player. And to me, he's a classic. If somebody gets hurt, we need to play this guy some, and he won't kill us. But like, a better example of a guy who has 2 or 3 skills, but they're elite is Kyle Anderson.
Yep.
Like, yes, he has drawbacks. Yes, against some teams, he's not a good matchup, but the things he does are really, really high level. And so there are times when you need that. That guy has to play and you need him. And I think he was one of the Wolves. I think he was like their 4th best player in that series. I know they lost in 5 games, but he was great. Those are the kind of guys that I'm more the weirdos, the guys who have specific elite skills that maybe aren't that good at other things. Those are the guys I love. Those are the guys that I think really can actually become. I mean, those are the guys. There's no star in the NBA that doesn't have some kind of elite skill. That's how you become stars.
Yep.
That's kind of the thing with Gigi. Like Gigi is just an elite shot creator for an 18-year-old who's 6'8", 6'9". But I think Jake is sort of also in that middle tier of like, I know what this guy is. And like, it just depends on if I want to pay premium for it or if I'm fine losing him.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. You know me. I love the weirdos too. Those unique players. Anyways, let's take a quick break and then we'll be back and we will break down some of the draft prospects that you think the Grizzlies should consider. Underdog Fantasy is a unique way to play fantasy sports for cash. You can do daily fantasy tournaments, you can play best ball, you can do highers or lowers. I've been using Underdog Fantasy for over a year. I use it mainly for the NBA and NFL, but they have every single sport. And now, if you sign up for Underdog Fantasy using my promo code FBBF, Underdog will match your opening deposit up to $250. Again, that's promo code FBBF, as in Fast Break Breakfast. So if you want to give Underdog Fantasy a try, use that promo code or Click the link in this episode's description. All right, in this draft, the Grizzlies have the 9th pick, and they also have the 39th pick. We've talked a lot about the Grizzlies situation of, like, you might actually consider need, and they've talked about acquiring a big man this summer. Of course, they can do that in free agency or through a trade. But with that 9th pick, and you consider which players might be available, who do you think would be the best player to walk away with if you're Memphis?
I personally would love if they picked up either Yves, Missi, or Kel'el Ware.
Yeah,
at the 5. I mean, Clingan would be a fine fit, and I think there's every chance that Clingan is just a solid 25-minute game guy for his entire career, and ends up being a top 5 to 6 player from this class. He is, like I said, he's like Zubac. He is just a drop big.
Yeah,
he's going to get killed on the perimeter. Kill is strong, but he will have plays where he gets just toasted. Like, if he gets switched out on the Steph, it's done.
Yeah, well,
I know that's true of a lot of bigs, but like, it's almost like it's.
If he gets switched out onto Lonnie Walker, done.
Yeah. Like, it's not the kind of big I prefer. I prefer the switch bigs. I mean, I think I've proven that. That's my favorite type of big is the Jaren type, or the Alex Sarr type, let's say.
So when I've, as an amateur have started to dive in on these players, I was drawn to Yves, Missi, and Kel'el Ware just because, I don't know, maybe it's just their archetype makes more sense. And so I'm just like, all right, dummy me. He's a shot blocker. They're athletic. They can switch some. And then Ware had some, the 3-point shot. Is this too high? Like, do you think like the 9th pick is a somewhat, okay. So
those
you're
guys
fine with doing it.
They're 12 and 13 for me.
Okay.
For second tier.
Yeah.
Ware is having a really weird, what I can only say because I'm kind of tangentially plugged in to Intel stuff. The Ware, because I've seen him in the 30s with some people. I think Bassini has him in the 30s. What that tells me is that there's somebody in the know, an agent or a coach or somebody who just hates him, like Cam Whitmore last year. He just had people who hated him, and that cost him because the NBA tries to value all those sources equally. Maybe they shouldn't. But Ware had one of the best combines in recent memory. Like, he tested incredibly. He was incredibly fast. The shot should be fine. He should be able to shoot pick and pops. Missi might even be more of a jagged player than him because he does not shoot at all. But he is, it's 6'11", 240. He had a 38.5-inch vert, and he ran it was the top 10 shuttle time, like top 10 3/4 court, top 10 shuttle time. I think he had a faster shuttle. He had like near Brandon Clark level shuttle, and Brandon Clark level 3/4 court, but at 7 foot shoes. So he might. He really, the guy I always look at, because I had to think for a while of like, who are switchable big men who aren't thin. Like, Ware's kind of thin. Sarr, Chet, Evan Mobley, all these guys are real thin. Sarr's like 225, but he's still not like ripped. And it took me a while to think of a guy. Serge Ibaka is a guy I've seen thrown around, but the guy I keep thinking of is young, like rookie Nene, before he like really filled out when he was so kind of thin.
Okay.
And Missi has that kind of like, he's built. He's a big dude, but he moves and jumps 1 foot, 2 foot leaper, dunks everything, can kind of face up and drive past people a little bit. He got fouled. I think he was like a 68% free throw rate guy, which is, even for center, is like crazy strong, but it's very good, very strong. And I feel like he is just pretty close to a plug and play, like rim running. I think if you're looking for a lively this year, he's probably the closest to that. He's a little smaller, but like, I think he's just ready to go right now.
Can Missi play alongside Brandon Clark? Because I feel like
so.
Most people, we obviously think like Jaren. All right, you could pair most bigs with Jaren, but like I feel like trying to figure that. All right, if we have Ja and Brandon and Missi on the court, basically 3 non-distance shooters, would that be an issue?
I think I want to see what it's tough because I don't know what Brandon's going to look like.
Yeah. I mean,
but
the one thing when he played 5 games, 6 games, he looked normal this year. Fingers crossed. The drawback that I hear with Ware that everyone keeps regurgitating is the low motor, and I get nervous because hey, Grizzlies fans, we've seen Stroma Swift, we saw Hasheem Thabit, we signed Darko Milicic. Those guys had no motor.
The thing with Ware, so I'm in a unique position because I'm an IU guy. I watched him. I probably have watched more games of him than I have any other player in this class, except maybe Sar. I guess Holland, because I watched a bunch of Holland like in high school. But I thought his motor was that was the real issue last year. He just didn't care. Yeah, he barely played at Oregon because he just didn't. He coasted on his talent. He thought he could just come in and play. That was sort of the agreement when he came to IU was like, you're going to play hard. And I would say 85-90% of the time, the motor was good. He didn't really take plays off. The thing he didn't do that I was really encouraged by is if he had a turnover or missed a shot, he didn't sulk. He just ran back down the court. He was the first guy down the court most of the time for IU, and they were a defensive try-hard team. It wasn't like he was – their issues were that they couldn't shoot, and they had terrible guard play. He also had, like – for me, motor isn't even so much effort as it is for centers, at least, do you want to be hit? You like being hit. You do big man stuff. And he really started. That was the thing. Like, he had the first game against Purdue, and they played UConn. They got destroyed in both those games because those were the two teams in the national title game. But the thing that was really kind of reminds me of Lively, this happened with Lively as well, where they would just post Zach Edey up on Ware, and he did fine. Like, Edey shot, I think, like, 6 of 16. Like, he wasn't great. And Clingan was like 3 of 12. Clingan couldn't get anything going on. Where
that man, Clingan's post moves that I've seen, those make me nervous. Where it's just so
he's just really so rudimentary.
It's like just turns around and misses half his layups. It's like what? Yeah, what's that about?
But physically, Ware did really well. He actually had a play against Harvard that I was really encouraged by, where this guy Chisholm Okpara, who was a so he's like a 6'8", 240, just one of those like little centers who beats people up. He was doing that to where he was pushing him around, pushing him off the screens, not letting him catch where he wanted. And at one point, he pushed him all the way out to the 3-point line on the catch, and where it was like kind of stumbling. And you could see him just be like, man, and he just took his arm and slammed it down on Okpara's shoulder, dislocated his shoulder, and hit like a 16-footer. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, this guy doesn't mind hitting people. Like, he's happy to hit people, and if he does that,
literally hitting people,
But if he's if he even feels like playing physically, then he's an NBA. He might be a starter because he could shoot. I think he can kind of handle. Like, he can take. I wouldn't be uncomfortable with him grabbing a rebound and going to midcourt with it. Like, that's fine. He can do that.
Okay,
which is not every center can do that.
Yeah,
but where I'm just optimistic about him because it's crazy to me that. I mean, I kind of compare him to Cauley-Stein physically, but with the caveat that you're getting Cauley-Stein before he develops all his horrible Willie Cauley-Stein habits.
Gotcha.
And I feel like, I mean, Willie Cauley-Stein was a top 5 pick for a reason. Like, guy was an athletic specimen. I feel like Kel'el, in this draft, it doesn't have, like, how many guys could be all-stars? Like, to me, it's like maybe 4. And I'm not saying he could be an all-star, but I feel like there's a level of physical talent and tools that he has that they're not in this draft. I don't know why he'd be going in the 30s. It's crazy to me to think he'd be going in the 30s.
Yeah.
And I'm betting when teams get him to work out, they'll see that.
So I want to ask you about a guy who pretty high up on your rankings that I saw on your Patreon that has been mocked a few times, a few different places to the Grizzlies. And that's Ron Holland. The first stuff I read about Ron Holland and looked at, I was like, oh yeah, cool. I'd love for him to fall to the Grizzlies. And then I kept watching more and more. And I was like, on offense, I was like, that's Josh Jackson. And so Ron Holland seems like maybe a better defense Josh Jackson. Talk me off the ledge there.
Yeah, I think that's not a horrible comparison. Like, physically, he kind of is the same size. I think the benefit, the positive for Ron is that he is never again going to have usage that he had at Ignite this year. There was a disaster. They went with too many prospects. They didn't have guys like, so the first year that Ignite existed, Jarrett Jack and Amir Johnson and all these guys were there, and like you need Jarrett Jack to take 30 shots.
Yeah.
Even 36-year-old Jared Jack, he'll do it. And this year, those guys were like John Jenkins and Eric
Shout out
Mika.
John Jenkins, friend of the program.
And John Jenkins is awesome, but like he's not a creator really. He's a spot up guy. And so they didn't have anyone else, and like he and Buzelis both they just threw them the ball with 15 seconds on the shot clock. We're like, Dad, do something. And those guys that's not the kind of player those guys are. To me, Ron, I feel like there are comparisons to those kind of wings who have failed, but the difference with Ron is that he is a psychopath in the best way. He's one of those guys who is, I mean, I'm not going to compare him to Jimmy Butler on the court, although he's probably better than 19-year-old Jimmy Butler. If you say you watch 19-year-old Jimmy Butler, then you're probably lying.
Yeah.
He was 22 when he came in the NBA. I don't remember freshman Jimmy Butler. But he is that level of like the self-confidence, the belief in himself, and just the motor is like 150% motor. Like he's got such a high motor that I was texted when they were playing. He was playing with the FIBA U19 team or U18 team last year or 2 years ago, whenever it was. That it was a Charles Barkley thing where it was like a 30-point game with 5 minutes to go, and somebody was like, "That's taken out. He's going to cause an international incident. He's going to hurt somebody playing too hard."
Yeah.
FIBA.
Okay.
And like, yeah, he's that kind of player. Like he's diving for every. Like I think Ron as a 4th or 5th starter would be awesome. Physically, he kind of like, I think he's still an underrated athlete. Like I think he's
really, because all I see is raves about his athleticism.
I think people are catching up, but like he's honestly always reminded me of Oubre, and like Oubre, especially the prospect, was an incredible athlete. Like he's a great athlete. I think you need to not be like the shot. He had so many like 10, 15 dribbles into pull-up shot. Like he's just not going to do that in the NBA. He'll be a spot-up guy. And I mean, before this year, the difference is Josh Jackson was a guard in high school, I would say. Like Josh Jackson was a high-usage 5-star like major prospect. Ron was like a power forward and a center a lot in high school. So he's just in the last year and a half being asked to be a wing. And I feel if he's at 9, I would take personally. He's a like off the court and you know, he's a perfect fit for the Grizzlies mentality wise. And B, I just think the physical talent is too overwhelming. And if you take a Josh Jackson guy at 9 and it doesn't work out, like
it's fine. Yeah.
It's taking those guys at 2 or 3, or you know, taking them when you're the Knicks and his name is RJ Barrett. That's maybe not the thing that always works out.
Yeah.
Because when you take those guys top 3, you're expecting to pay them $200 million.
I want to hit some of these other guys who I've consistently seen in the top 10 who I don't have a great grasp on, and I'm not overly encouraged by the various 10-minute YouTube videos I've been watching. Tell me what I should be excited about, or if the Grizzlies should consider Matis Buzelis. Is it Tidjane Salaun? That guy who looks Tidjane. Okay, he gives me Skeetish Feely vibes. Well, I see no rebounding, no defense, and you hope the shot goes in. But again, he's super young. Yeah.
His defense is interesting. We'll talk about him first. His defense is interesting because he's not a shot blocker. And if he was a shot blocker, I'd probably have him like top 5 because he'd be like a center. But I actually like his defense. Like he's really good at walling people off. He keeps his hands up. He doesn't foul. Like as like a perimeter, like rotational guy, I think he's pretty good for a 6'10" guy who moves like that.
Okay.
He moves like that as the real pitch. Like he moves like were you at Summer League 2014 when Giannis did that Euro step from the 3-point line and laid it in?
Yes, I was.
I'm not comparing.
I think that was my first one. That was my first one. Yeah.
I'm not comparing him directly to Giannis, but he's one of those guys when you watch him, he does have those flashes of like this guy's fast and athletic and coordinated for a guy that big.
Gotcha.
The shot is fine. He just has like it's an obvious like he's still figuring out his release because it's kind of slow and he has a really weird follow through. He holds it, but I mean the numbers were fine. Like he can really attack off closeouts. He's very different than GG, but he would be in that level of prospect for me where like it could fail. It's easy to see him failing, but it's also kind of I have some FOMO of him because I feel like he's a weird. Like if he really works, he could almost be somebody's like
So you say
TJ
the FOMO.
Washington.
I feel like when I look at people's draft boards, and this is not meant as a criticism, and I'm obviously speaking from a level of extreme ignorance, but I do feel like so many of these guys, there's this FOMO where it's like Ricochet and like Buzelis and even Sar and like Salaun, where it's like, okay, this feels to me like the early 2000s draft. Like Nowitzki was amazing. I don't want to miss on a Nowitzki again. And, you know, maybe it is the lack of higher end quality to this draft where you're like, I saw these American college players. What if the guy playing in this French league, what if he turns out to be good? So like, I'm super hesitant for a lot of those guys.
This is kind of a golden generation for the French players, though, to be honest. Because like Pacome Daddier is an NBA player. Melvin Aginsa might be an NBA player. He's really inconsistent, but he's also super young. And obviously, you know, we have Wembanyama, but like, and we'll have Nolan Traore next year. Who's like seems like a pretty elite guard prospect. I would say I have more FOMO for Salaun than Ricochet, but I'm much more confident in Ricochet being like a starter. To me, Ricochet he will not be with the Grizzlies pick. To me, he's not a forward pick. We're like, I feel pretty confident about him. He will be good. I'm also not like, if that guy, I'm not going to cry if I can't pay that guy $40 million a year. I guess is what I'll say. Yeah, he might go number one overall. We might say, but like Salaun, I feel like has more upside athletically. Like he's better at, but is just right now not as good at basketball. But he is also younger. He's a July or August birthday, I think. So he's not. He will be 18 that summer, which is always the. If he goes and plays like, I'm not gonna care. He's 18. Yeah. Salaun, I think, is an interesting guy there. I don't know if he'll be there. Is the thing. I mean, there's a team.
He seems to be rising in a lot of recent mock drafts.
This is not official intel. Like I can't say I've heard this from anybody who would know better. But there is a team that has two top 8 picks. Yeah. That currently employs someone that Salaun has been friends with since he was 11 years old, and their sisters played together on the French national team. So I would not be shocked if, let's say, that team drafts him at 8.
Right.
I feel like if anyone has say on that, it should be Wembanyama. Hey, can you draft my friend who is like a lottery pick? It's not like a nepotism thing. But Buzelis at 9, I don't think he'll be there either. But I think that would be interesting because he is kind of a 4. I feel like comparing him to Salaun is interesting because athletically he's not even close to him. And the shot wasn't as good this year, although I think it'll be fine. But he is a shot blocker. Like, that was the thing that really stuck out. I've always liked his defense. There's the thing. He doesn't look like a guy who's good at defense. He looks like a thin white shooter. I mean, he looks like Timothy Chalamet build. He's really thin. Yeah. But he is a shot blocker. He's a good athlete, and he has always been like a rotations guy, a team defense guy. I feel good about even in the G League when he got switched on to like the high level, like the guards who like kicking people. He did fine. Like he moves well. He's a little bit like Chet in that he is probably tougher than he looks like he is. Like he's fine getting hit. He's fine trying. Like he will try to dunk on people, which is, you know, that's sort of the reason Pokusevski didn't work, was that he was too afraid to get in. Although I still think he's an NBA player, but Pokusevski had no physicality whatsoever, and that was an obvious flaw. Buzelis, for a 6'9", 185-pound guy, is pretty tough. I would say he can take hits. He can block shots. If he shoots 35%, he's probably a starter. Like, I feel like at some point, the shot was it came and went in a weird way. Where like some guys have long streaks, but he had streaks where he just wouldn't shoot, and it's like, you got to shoot, man. Like, you're not doing it. You're not a creator. Like, to me, the guy he honestly profiles most like is Avdia. Gotcha. Like, this is not a guy that you are building your offense around, but he is a guy like Stephon Castle. I think Buzelis in the top 10 is the guy I most would want to have when I'm good. Like, okay, so that's the Grizzlies situation. Yeah, that connective piece. Yeah. Like he fits in. He will help an NBA team. I'm just not. I've never been a top 5 guy for him because even in this draft, when you take a guy top 5, you are expecting them to be a load bearing piece of your offense. And like, I don't think that's not Buzelis. That's not necessarily Stephon Castle. That might be Salaun. I don't know. That's sort of the allure with him. that's the reason Rishi is going to go in that range, because I think teams will think he's going to be like a creator. I'm not sure if he will be, but that's the idea. Either of those guys at 9, though, Salaun or Buzelis, I think would be quality picks because they could both be starters at some point, which I think is all you can really ask for.
We did not get too deep into these prospects, so maybe I'll have you back on before the draft, and we could get some of these deeper shots. You could do your called shots on a Vince Williams, or all right, is that the one? No,
definitely with some of these other guys going back. That's my guy right now.
Oh, okay. No, but I want to ask you about 2 more guys who are seem to be certain first rounders. I like them pretty well based on the little I've looked at. The last time I saw your board, I think you had a little bit lower. Devin Carter, who is he maybe a Melton type? And so like Devin Carter and then Tristan da Silva. What are your thoughts on those guys? Is 9 too high for both of them? What do you think about their prospects and their prospects specifically on the Grizzlies?
Well, with some guys dropping out, some of the like weirdo high upside guys I really like dropping out. I think those guys are both going to jump up pretty high. Carter, that might be his floor right now. Like he might be a guy who goes there. And it's weird for me because he's not the kind of guy that I'm usually in love with. Like he has good tools, but I have watched more of him, and he might just end up being, Melton, like Javon Carter if he had both ends of his career connected, because he was terrible at defense this year, which was confusing. A terrible strong. He wasn't very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, Carter is interesting. So he's got length, 6'8", 6'9" wingspan for a guard. He's got pull-up shooting. Like it got better and better as the year went on. He was like a role player guy in college, or he projected as a role player guy, and now it's like the shooting might be real. And he's got the thing the NBA can never get enough of. He's got NBA pedigree. His dad, Anthony Carter, played the league for a million years, as we all know.
The last we heard is still employed by the Grizzlies, although apparently the other shoe hasn't dropped yet as far as finding out which assistant coaches are out for the Grizzlies. But yes, go ahead.
But yeah, Devin. So Devin, I think, is a guy who, again, in this class, I couldn't really criticize if he went 8, 9, 10, 11, because I do feel pretty confident he will be good. Maybe even as a rookie, he'll be good. Maybe even you get like some Cason Wallace out of him, because the length is so impressive, and he's like a strong dude that he can guard up a little. You could put him on the third guard or the smaller wings and feel okay about him. And yeah, I mean, Devin's also just fun. Like he's just really energetic. He's just really winsome. I like to say it. Like you watch him and you just have like fun. Like he just plays really hard, has a lot of fun. Kind of reminds me of I mean, he plays different from Kobe White, but kind of the same thing. Why it was so fun to see Kobe White figure it out this year. It was like, you like that guy. You like him as a player. He seems like a nice guy. You want him to do well. So Devin, I think, could go there. Da Silva, it's weird for me to say he kind of reminds me of Hawkes, and that makes me not like him as much. But he is almost like 3 out of 5 guy where, like, I guess Hawkes is a better ISO scorer. Like, I don't know what Da Silva does at like a high level, which is why I wouldn't take him in the lottery. But he will be a top 20 pick probably because he's 6'9", can pass, can shoot a little bit, can dribble a little bit, good defense. Like, kind of like LaRavia might be a better comp for him, actually.
Oh yeah, okay.
Of like, has forward size, maybe not forward athleticism, but it's just like smooth and smart, and generally seems to like he knows what he's doing and is productive. Colorado's an interesting team because they might have 3 top 35 picks, and they won the Pac-12, but it's kind of a Cinderella run for them, and then they got smoked in the tournament. So it's like, that's kind of weird that you had 3 guys who will be drafted and weren't that good.
I didn't ask you about Cody Williams, who seems like could be an option for the Grizzlies. I mean, again, all these guys who have shooting and are like 3/4s or project to eventually be that. It makes sense theoretically for the Grizzlies. So I'm sure
Cody, I think you're banking on him developing physically like his brother, like Jalen Dub Williams. But he's interesting because he was one of the best non-guard driving finishers. I think he was 74 or 75% on the rim, and is not that athletic. He moves well, but he's not like explosive. Or he's not a guy who just goes and dunks on people. So I think he could kind of end up being like a Jeremy Grant type, because Jeremy Grant could always finish. He just had to work on the rest of the stuff. And kind of a weird, goofy athlete, draws a lot of fouls, good defense. So I think Cody, I'm going to say, he will not get to the Grizzlies. I'll say that.
Oh, you think he's going top 8?
It doesn't sound like he will.
I feel like Brian, I feel like you've already said more than 8 people are definitely going before the Grizzlies pick at 9. I haven't written them all down, but I feel like you've thrown out a lot of names that you say are top 8.
It wouldn't be surprising if these guys didn't make it.
Yeah.
But Cody, Cody's interesting because Cody, like, if you're going to take Salaun or Buzelis, those guys are probably 4-3s, like guys who, and that might be Cody also. So if that's the kind of guy you're looking at, then I think you have to look at Cody. He's a guy, though, he's just like such a weird athlete that I don't know if I have a lot of FOMO for him. It's either it's odd for me to say this, that I don't have FOMO. He is a little bit like Leonard Miller, where it's like, how does this guy have this skill set at this size? But I love that Leonard was such a freak that I just love him. But I also, even now, I wasn't saying draft Leonard Miller at like 6. It's different than where he went.
Yeah.
Like Cody in the 20s, I'd be crazy. But I don't know. It's an interesting draft for those kind of guys. Like, there's a lot of guys. For as mediocre to below average a draft it is, there are still guys who could bust out in weird ways. There are still like intriguing. There's still a lot of wings in this draft, which I think is a saving grace. Even though some of them went back to college, I would have talked about Tidjane Grant Foster, shedding a single tear for my most athletic son, and also just a guy that you root for. He didn't play for almost 3 years because he had 2 heart attacks.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Can't talk about it anymore. He's not in this draft.
Yep.
But yeah, I think those are some of the guys the Grizzlies should look at. I guess Carter would be the guy. If you want a guard, that's the kind of guard you want. Like, you're not taking a guard at 9 who won't play next year. That would be, for a team that I think is trying to contend, that would probably not be a good pick.
Yeah.
So if you're taking a guard, he needs to be like a Melton guy, like a guy who fits in. I would feel more. I feel they're probably taking a big or a big wing, at least.
Yeah,
so I feel like we kind of talked about everybody.
Yeah, I feel like so my takeaway from this episode with you, thanks for spending so much time with me. My takeaway is you've given me permission to want Yves, Missi, and Kel'el Ware, because those are guys where I'm like, oh, I like that. I like what they do. And so I feel like you've granted me permission to be like, yeah, take him at 9. Who cares?
Yves is just such a dominant athlete he is I would watch. If you're considering, Kyle Filipowski is a guy I'm not high on, but he will be a top 20 pick.
Yeah.
And will probably play in the NBA for a while. He's just, he's 6'11" with a 6'10" wingspan, and the shot, he's like a 31% shooter. If he was like an elite, if he was like a Kelly Olynyk shooter,
that smells like Aldama.
That smells like Frank Kaminsky to me.
Kaminsky.
Which is funny because if you look at his physical comps, they're literally all white guys because there are it's Brian Butch.
The wingspan. Yeah.
It's like Brian, but I would watch Duke and Baylor because Missi beat his ass.
Yeah, I think I saw a lot of clips of that matchup, and I was like, because I had read on Filipowski, and it seemed intriguing, But I lean for these right now. Missi and Ware seem cool, and you're way out on Edie, so good.
No, not so much. Okay. I would take him at 9.
Yeah.
At a certain point, like he does deserve credit. He has improved laterally. Like his times at the combine, it was weird to see people. They were good for a 7'4" guy. Like, they're way better than I imagined Boban would have ever run. But they still weren't good. Like, he's still gonna get targeted. He's still gonna get blown by. But he deserves a lot of credit. They improved from unplayably awful to just like kind of bad. And so if he could stay on the floor defensively, he'll be an NBA player for a decade because he will score. Like Boban, he will be. He'll seal you. He'll hit that little 6-foot hook, and you're not going to do anything about it. Even now, when Boban plays,
yeah.
If you get the ball to him in the paint, you're done. Good luck.
Yeah.
So Edie will be for. I think he'll be in my first round. Like, just the idea of him as like an elite. If this was 1985, he'd be the number 1 pick. Easy. If this was 2003, he'd be the number 1 pick.
Yeah.
But he's not Yao. He's not he's got these guys. He is like Boban. He's way better than the Taco Fall, Simbalar, like
Gotcha.
sideshow freak types.
Yeah.
The guys that get cheered when they come in Summer League. Those guys.
I do. Very well.
He's a really good basketball player, and he is one of the best college basketball players of the 21st century. Like, he's a great college basketball player. So I'm definitely a lot less low on him. I won't say I'm high on him, but I'm more like, as time has gone on, I've been like, that guy would probably be good. Just defense is the question. Perimeter defense is the question.
Well, Brian, thanks so much again. Maybe I'll get you on in a couple of weeks. We can go some of these deeper cuts. But if you guys want to get more of Brian's draft content, go to patreon.com/BrianJMBA. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to you coming on again sometime.
Yep. Thanks for having me.